Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 295, cover dated December 1992. So this is part 5 of 12 of X-Cutioner's song. The cover here, we don't have a caption, but we very obviously have Storm, Colossus, Beast going up against a knocked down Apocalypse. The art here by Brandon Peterson and Terry Austin, and some interesting little details of wood grain here, some screen tones on Apocalypse's shoulder pad, and Storm's cloak here. I don't like the grey colour for Storm's costume, and I also think if I were the editor at the time, I would have looked for Archangel going up against Apocalypse on this cover with some members of the Gold Team in the background. That is a confrontation that's been teased in the first 4 issues of the crossover, so why not show it on this cover when Apocalypse finally goes up against the X-Men. Also here to the right we've got the Skybox card that was included in the original polybag, which this issue came in, and it features from Stryfe's strike file the Hunters Bishop and Wolverine. And if I turn the card around, we've got some text from Stryfe's strike file. Hunters, born and bred, in a world too weak for them, they catch the scent of trouble, and they think they know the intent of the prey. Let the pawns sniff the rotted wood for maggots, let them catch the scent, then they will know the scent they have captured on icy winds is that of their own fear, the smell of their own deaths. Okay, so let's take that away and open up the issue to our splash page. So, Apocalypse has been revived in Egypt early, and so he hasn't finished his process of rebirth, and we can see that represented here in the art by Brandon Peterson and Terry Austin. Pretty horrific looking. And our creative team is Scott Lobdell, writer, Brandon Peterson, penciler, Terry Austin, veteran X-Men inker, Chris Eliopoulos, letters, and we have Joe Rosas handling the colors for this issue. And the title of the issue, Familiar Refrain. So let's continue and see where Apocalypse is exactly. And just some interesting details of the narrative captions here, written by Lobdell. From the moment his master's whip first bit deep into his all too malleable flesh, Apocalypse understood the secret of life is not in living, but rather in surviving. It is this one basic truth he has spent a score of lifetimes trying to impart upon his genetic brethren. Only the strongest survive, ever feasting upon the bones of the weak and unfit. He also learned a long time ago, no one loves a prophet. So this is the first indication of Apocalypse's origins in ancient Egypt, with that line about the master's whip biting deep into his all too malleable flesh. And of course, Apocalypse is a mutant, and he has molecular control over the entirety of his body. So he can do anything with the molecules of his body. So he's climbing up this seaside cliff, and he arrives at this house, which is one of his safe houses. And in fact, it turns out to be the house base, first seen, used by him all the way back in X Factor numbers 5 to 6 of the title. So some continuity that Lobdell is acknowledging and drawing on for this part of the crossover. And Apocalypse, having entered into his safe house, smashing through the glass there, is met by waiting X-Men, the Gold Team, who have taken out Apocalypse's horsemen, Caliban there, Death, War and Famine. And so here he is in his weakened state, facing off against these X-Men. So nice poses here by Brandon Peterson. And let's continue, because we've got a scene shift back to the X-Mansion. We've got Jubilee here. Well, she is just a teenager, and she is taunting and goading X-Force, who it's revealed have since their capture at the end of part 4 of the crossover, have been put into the school uniforms, and they are in a makeshift cell in the X-Men's danger room. But Strong Guy pulls Jubilee off and out of the danger room and berates her for being a spoiled brat. So let's see what else is happening. So up in the control booth, we have Lorna Dane, and she's upset at the whole situation. As she says here, no hologram programs, no social amenities, nothing to suggest this is anything more than a holding cell. But Havok is more hard-nosed about everything. He says their leader is accused of an attempt to assassinate Professor X. Until we can prove their claims that they've cut all ties with Cable, we have to detain X-Force as suspected accomplices. Lorna's still upset, and basically she asks what happened, and Havok replies, life happened. So there's a debriefing with Val Cooper that they're going to, but in the meantime we get this odd little scene with Psylocke, who's standing vigil over Professor X, who's been infected with the transmode virus. And we have her thinking here that she too had her mind and body, heart and soul sculpted into another form entirely. And she thinks she won't stand by and see it happen to someone else. So there's an implication here in these panels that she's thinking about using her psychic knife to kill Professor X, a type of mercy killing, euthanasia. But she's interrupted by Moira MacTaggart, who is calling everyone to the war room for the debriefing by Val. But as Psylocke exits, she says if necessary that she'll return if necessary to complete the task that technology could not, because none of the technology available to the X-Men, the Shi'ar technology, is capable of dealing with the virus that Professor X has been infected with. And then we switch back to Apocalypse's house, and the fight now between him and the assembled Gold team, with Beast and Quicksilver along too. So Apocalypse, despite his weakened state, fairly easily takes out Iceman. The Beast bounds into action, and Apocalypse punches him out, and he knocks into Storm, and they're both knocked out the window and knocked unconscious. And so then we've got Quicksilver facing off against Apocalypse. Nice anchor image here from Peterson and Terry Austin. Then we've got a 2-page sequence featuring Jean Grey, who's been handed over by Mr. Sinister to Stryfe. So Stryfe has Jean running through a gauntlet of these tentacles and arms that are clawing and pawing and groping at her, and her powers of telepathy and telekinesis are all but useless in her futile bid for freedom. But she doesn't cry out. And then she does finally emerge from the gauntlet, and Stryfe is there to meet her. And he asks her, a horrifying feeling, no, to be clutched and clawed by strange, unfeeling, uncaring alien hands, not at all unlike, I must assume, what an innocent babe feels when bereft of the love and warmth that is its birthright. Wouldn't you agree? And he chokes her out until she turns unconscious or goes unconscious. And the implication of this scene is, well, what? Something to do with Stryfe's parentage, yes? And what does Jean have to do with any of that? And then we go precisely to the X-Men's war room underneath the mansion, and Val Cooper here giving the presentation about what they know regarding Stryfe. But she says, despite the collective resources at everyone's disposal, there's precious little that they actually know about the man except for his name. And she talks about how the MLF have hit a genetic imaging plant in France, the assault on Professor X, the kidnapping of Jean and Scott, and how Stryfe evidently is obviously broadening his horizons. So that's as much as they know. And of course, here we've got a little funny bit with Strong Guy suggesting that it might be about the glove that X-Factor took from their encounter with Stryfe in X-Factor 78. Here we've got this somewhat ironic comment by Jubilee, ultimately, that where she says here, "You called us up here to say you ain't get zip. For all anybody knows, it could be Cable walking around with an ice bucket on his head." So, and here we've got Gambit and Rogue avoiding the gaze of everyone in the room. And what's all that about? Well, it turns out Wolverine and Bishop haven't arrived, and Rogue and Gambit make out that they don't know where the two guys are, but they do. And where are they? If we turn the page, they're in Canada at Dept K. And so they've arrived there looking for particular intelligence files, and they need to apply a more quote-unquote personal touch to get them. So they fight off these generic-looking security guards and make their way towards the record room. But there's a nice little back and forth here between Wolverine and Bishop, in particular here at the end, where Bishop asks Wolverine, once this is all over, if you could make it a point to tell Storm. "What?" says Wolverine. "That you subdued these guys without killing any of them?" "I'd be happy to, kid. Just between you and me, of course. You remind me of me in my youth." So it's a nice little bit there. A bit of banter somewhat between Bishop and Wolverine. But then we're back at Apocalypse's safe house, not so safe, where he's easily taken out Quicksilver, and then Colossus tackles him to the ground, and Archangel gets his adamantium wings right under Apocalypse's neck, but he refrains from decapitating Apocalypse, as Colossus says, "Fortunately for you, we realize you represent our best hope of finding Cyclops and Jean." So that's why they're keeping him alive, to have him talk. But Apocalypse reveals that they have no hope at all, for you see, I did not return home out of some misguided sentimentality. Rather, this estate houses power. So he powers himself up. But the narrative caption is interesting here. Though he would never admit it to another living being, there is very little Apocalypse understands about the alien technology at his disposal. Technology incorporated into the very structure of safe houses like this throughout the world. So Apocalypse, not fully the master of the technology which revives him, allows him to rebirth, and powers him up here. And here we see him in his powered up state. Interesting visuals here by Peterson and Terry Austin. Also want to point out these little kind of hook hatches that Austin is doing. Not his normal style. You can see it throughout this issue, and it's something that he's picked up from, we see it here, something he's picked up from perhaps studying Scott Williams's style. See it here as well on the edge of his brow. Again, as I said, not Austin's style prior to this point. So something he's thinking about and reproducing here. And again, it's distinctive of Scott Williams' inking style. So interesting to see Williams, who was influenced by Austin, influencing the master, if you will. And then Apocalypse, although he's got all of these 6 X-Men who he's taken out, as he says here, 6 X-Men in under 60 seconds, to think, I felt I passed my prime several hundred years ago. He should take the opportunity to slay them, to cull the chaff from the wheat, which is his whole raison d'etre. But he says to slaughter the unconscious foe is so unseemly. So he teleports away, determined to discern the identity of the tormentor and put an end to his machinations. So he's on the hunt for Stryfe, yes. Then we go back to the X-Mansion, where Sam Cannonball has been freed from the cell in the danger room for a bit of a chat with Gambit and Havok. So Gambit, obviously in the office of Blue Team leader, in the absence of Cyclops and Beast. And here he is basically threatening Cannonball to help them learn more about where Cable might be. But Cannonball basically insists he's told them everything he already knows. But then they ask him about Stryfe, and Cannonball is forthcoming on that point, and the mutant liberation front. So he says to them also that if he had unlimited access to X Factor's government computers, he might be able to narrow down a list of suspected hideouts, but it would come with a price tag. So he wants a full presidential pardon for every member of X-Force. And, you know, like Havok says, that's not even a consideration. But Gambit gives him his uniform and makes him the offer that if he helps them find the MLF, you can help us take them down as an equal partner. So it looks like Cannonball is going to accept that offer. And then we go back to Canada and Department X, or sorry, not X, but K rather. And we have here body sliding to the scene, Cable, and he has arrived in order to steal the necessary files he needs to track down Stryfe and the MLF and body slide away before anyone has a clue. And he's going to use in his own mind the distraction of some other intruders to cover his stealing the files. So he blasts through this wall here, taking the quick way through to the file room. But who's there in the file room except for Wolverine and Bishop? And so, as Cable says to himself, it's going to be one of those days. So the X-Cutioner song continues, we're told here, in the pages of X Factor number 85. That'll be part 6. And there you go. So I do hope that you enjoyed this read-through and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 295, part 5 of X-Cutioner song. If you did enjoy this video, please like it. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to Comics Bazaar and stay tuned for more content like this.